At the time, most of the dolls on the market were baby dolls.
In the past, dolls had all been baby dolls.
Barbara only had baby dolls to play with.
Girls are supposed to play with baby dolls.
But the dolls were always and forever baby dolls.
Mattel, that's not true and you know it. So the Barbie movie starring Margot Robbie just released, and it continues the narrative that Mattel's been pushing for literal years, like in the Toys That Made Us on Netflix, or in the Toys That Built America on History Channel, that Barbie was the first fashion doll and every other doll before that were just baby dolls, which were only created to manipulate little girls into becoming subservient wives and mothers, and baby dolls offer no value outside of that context, and the only option that girls had for fashion play was one-dimensional paper dolls, because the patriarchy didn't want little girls getting ideas.
While the boys had toys that inspired limitless imagination, girls were playing with mostly bits of cardboard.
At the time, that was really the only way that sort of fashion play was expressed.
Frankly, I think the whole thing is just a corporate conspiracy. In reality, there was already an established market for fashion dolls, with multiple companies putting out their own dolls before Barbie ever came on the scene in '59. But Mattel has the power and resources to control the narrative and basically rewrite history. Now, dolls have always existed in some form. They are extremely universal, and can be found in cultures from all over the world. They even found articulated dolls from way back in ancient Greece. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be focusing on the 20th century American market. All toys are a product of their time, and not just for societal norms, but also when it comes to the economy or the materials available. Most dolls today are made out of plastic, but that wasn't widely available until after 1945. Before then, the toy market looked a lot different. Dolls still came in a variety of materials, ranging from pretty expensive like porcelain dolls to more affordable like cloth or paper dolls. There was also composition, which is basically sawdust and glue, which could easily crack by a child playing with it or even higher low temperatures. But dolls also came in a variety of age ranges. Yes, there were baby dolls, but there were also dolls that resembled children, and teenagers, and adults. And it's weird to insist that these products either didn't exist, or only existed for nefarious reasons. The early 20th century was a pretty tumultuous time. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. Many people had to work with what they had, and create their own toys out of things like socks, rags, and paper. All children deserved toys, regardless of their family's financial situation. Rag dolls like Raggedy Ann and Andy were very popular, and fairly easy to replicate if you couldn't buy one. But when it came to fashion play, many people couldn't even afford fashions for themselves, so paper dolls were a good and cheap option to fill that kind of play. Paper dolls have existed for as long as printing itself, and they were widely available, often appearing in newspapers and magazines, with each publication having their own unique characters. One magazine that eventually gained a lot of prominence is McCall's. If you're familiar with sewing or cosplay at all, you might recognize the name from the patterns they make. They introduced their own paper dolls called Betsy McCall, along with her family and friends. These paper dolls were a huge hit, and when plastic did become widely available, McCall decided to bring Betsy from 1D to 3D. So children who had been playing with the paper dolls now had a new way to interact with her. She was a child-bodied doll, however she was still a little fashionista, and had multiple fashion packs and accessories available.
Just look at Betsy McCall, all dressed up for the prom.
And I think it's kind of insulting to give Ruth Handler all the credit for thinking about turning a paper doll into a 3-dimensional doll, when that's literally what Betsy McCall is.
Ruth was looking at this and she would think to herself, why isn't there a 3-dimensional doll that my daughter can dress?
Betsy McCall with an all-new wardrobe.
Something else these documentaries focus on, and I mean hyper-focus on, is Barbie's breasts. It's actually really creepy.
No mother is going to buy her daughter a doll with breasts.
Great big pointy tits.
They didn't like the idea of a doll with boobs.
Mothers will never buy their daughters a doll with breasts.
Is this a gift for my daughter or for my husband?
With very grown-up features.
They didn't think that a doll with breasts was exactly appropriate.
Basically, they argue that the people of the 50s were totally scandalized by an adult-bodied doll, and by that they mean has breasts, and would never buy it for their children. And this is also greatly exaggerated. In the Toys That Made Us, they throw shade at Ideal Toy Company, one of Mattel's rivals at the time, by showing a commercial for one of their baby dolls, and acted like Ideal was part of the problem by pushing patriarchal ideals onto little girls. However, Ideal had multiple dolls available, in multiple sizes and different age age ranges. They even openly advertised their Little Miss Revlon doll as coming with undergarments like bras, both in written ads and in their television ads.
Little Miss Revlon doll by Ideal is just 10.5 inches high. Wears a bra and girdle, high-heeled shoes for only $2.98. You'll have fun dressing her in her own high-fashion wardrobe.
And that's just one example of the competition. Other dolls also came with lingerie and had adult bodies that included sculpted breasts, like the Dollikin. These were kind of like a precursor to the modern ball-jointed doll, the main focus being on posability. They had 16 points of articulation and a number of fashions available. So the idea that the people of the 50s were completely scandalized by the thought of an adult-bodied doll for children just isn't true. I'm not saying Barbie didn't face any pushback when coming to market, but they don't have to be this extreme about it to the point where they're hyper-focusing on her body, while also blatantly misrepresenting the market at the time. And it is kind of annoying that whenever Barbie's history does come up, they often make a bunch of sex and boob jokes. What actually set Barbie apart from her competition was an aggressive marketing campaign. Mattel was one of the first adopters to advertise on television, and they had a close relationship with Disney. At that time, there was a limited amount of channels and content that people could watch, so basically everyone across the nation was seeing these commercials. On top of that, a lot of her contemporaries didn't believe in marketing on TV. They thought it was vulgar. So while there were other dolls being advertised, Mattel got the primetime spots, and that's how Barbie took over the industry. Ruth Handler basically gets all the credit for being the pioneer for this field, but in reality there were a lot of inspirational businesswomen who preceded her, but have largely fallen into obscurity. So I wanted to shine a light on some of these stories, because I think they deserve to be told. And I guess the best story to start with is Madame Alexander. 2023 is their 100-year anniversary. The company is as old as Disney, and it was founded by a woman named Madame Beatrice Alexander. Born on New York's Lower East Side, she was the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants. Her stepfather was a toy maker who owned a doll hospital. In the early 1900s, many dolls on the market were porcelain dolls. These were expensive but fragile, and many of them were imported from overseas, so when they broke, it wasn't really economical to just throw them away and get a new one. So doll hospitals existed to repair these dolls, so she would watch people come in with their fancy but broken dolls, and even though her family repaired them, they couldn't actually afford these dolls themselves, and their finances would take a big hit during World War I. The war caused an embargo on many European products, including porcelain, so they weren't getting those fancy dolls in anymore, which meant less customers, so she had the idea to make a cloth doll dressed as a Red Cross nurse, which was very timely, and it worked. These dolls managed to keep them afloat during the war. She had a strong business sense, and in 1923 she took out a loan and founded the Madame Alexander Doll Company. She wanted to make her own fancy dolls, to rival the ones that she grew up around, but ones that weren't quite as breakable. She employed her family and neighbors. She also insisted that her husband leave his job and come work for her. He refused, not wanting to risk losing his secure job to become a manager of a company that might fail, so she threatened to divorce him, claiming that she could just find another husband. Luckily, the company ended up being a huge success, and the couple went on to be business partners and had multiple children together. They introduced a lot of new innovations into the market, like rooted doll hair, and were one of the first companies to use plastic. Then in 1953, England saw the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and Madame Alexander was commissioned by the New York department store Abraham & Straus to create a doll display to commemorate the coronation. Alexander went all out for this, recreating the coronation with extreme detail, even going as far as to source the fabrics from the same mill in England that were used to create the actual outfits for the real coronation, to ensure that her doll clothes were as accurate as possible. On top of that, due to the limitations in technology at the time, people in America weren't actually able to see the coronation when it happened, since live TV didn't exist yet. So CBS used the dolls to recreate the coronation for people at home. A few years after this, Madame Alexander came out with a Sissy doll, inspired by that original coronation group. She had a sophisticated wardrobe and sculpted feet, so that way she could wear heels. Sissy was extremely popular, even being used as a model for advertisements like soap and perfume and other household items, which is actually a pretty ingenious marketing ploy because you're advertising two products at once, both Sissy as the doll and whatever other product she's showing off. So people in the 50s were actually pretty familiar with an adult-bodied doll, and Sissy is credited as being the first American fashion doll. Madame Alexander was a true pioneer in her field, and despite the popular belief, she was far from the only woman to be working working in this industry. In fact, there were many inspirational women who are just like her, like Jenny Graves. Born Jenny Adler, at 15 her father passed away, forcing her to leave school so she can get work to support her family. She found work at a fish company, but she hated it. Regardless, you gotta do what you gotta do, so she pressed forward. When she got married, she continued to work, but she always loved to sew, and would often make doll clothes, which she would then donate to church fundraisers and charities. Unfortunately, she discovered that her doll clothes had made their way to department stores where they were selling for big money, and she wasn't getting any of it. So she decided if her pieces were good enough to sell, she might as well be the one selling them, and started a business. So she founded the Vogue Doll Company in 1922. While she initially started out with just doll clothes, she eventually began producing her own dolls. Her husband passed away in 1939, in the height of the Great Depression, and World War II was just about to start. So the company was her only source of income, and she had 3 children to support. But through her determination and ingenuity, she was able to grow the business into the #1 manufacturer of dolls in the United States. She collaborated with her daughter Virginia, who was very talented in her own right, and together they made a lot of products. Their smash hit being the Ginny doll, who was named after Virginia. This was an 8-inch doll made to represent a child, so that way she could be in the same life stage as the actual children who were playing with her. And as those children aged, they decided to expand Ginny's brand. They gave her a pet dog, an older sister named Jill who had a mature body, an older brother named Jeff, a baby sister named Jeanette. The whole thing actually reminds me a lot of LOL Surprise nowadays, where they started with the tots and then expanded by giving them pets and little siblings and older siblings. This is clearly a tried and true model, and it's amazing how much Jenny Graves was able to accomplish over 70 years ago, and yet she gets no credit. And she's far from the only one. Another pioneer of the doll industry, Nancy Ann Abbott, is lost in more than one way. Abbott didn't start out in dolls, she actually wanted to go to Hollywood and become a famous star. So at age 19, she followed her dreams to Hollywood. She took the stage name Nancy Phillips and landed roles alongside famous silent era actress Louise Brooks. Unfortunately, these films are now considered lost media, which really sucks because A City Gone Wild actually sounds like a really cool thriller. Hopefully someday they'll be recovered. To support herself between roles, she took work designing dresses for Hollywood actresses, and she liked to dress dolls too. And one day in Hollywood, a friend of hers asked her to dress up one of her dolls, which she did. And when she returned the doll, others saw it and were impressed, and commissioned ones of their own. It was so popular that she became overwhelmed with orders, so she decided to leave Hollywood behind and start her own business. She started the company in 1936 out of her apartment. She changed her name to Nancy Ann Abbott to distance herself from her Hollywood career and focus exclusively on dolls. Personally, I'm surprised she didn't use whatever fame she cultivated to try to sell the dolls, but I guess she didn't need it because these dolls were crazy popular. She ended up having to unhook her phone line because she was falling behind on back orders, hand painting them by herself. She rose to the top of the industry with her storybook collection. These were 5-inch dolls based off of fairy tale and storybook characters. She also made dolls based off of things like the seasons and the world around you. These toys allowed children to express their imagination using a doll that was in the same age range as they were, and help visualize the world around them in a creative and fun way. This was all going on during the Great Depression, and she was killing it. But then the US entered into World War II, and many companies folded due to the fact that materials were now being rationed by the government. But Nancy Ann managed to land a contract with the US military, where she would make dishware for Navy hospitals, and were then sent to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. However, the military decided that her dolls were good for morale, so she got to keep making dolls which were also sent to Pearl Harbor. That way those stationed there could send them home as gifts to their loved ones. So even though they were missing special occasions like birthdays or Christmas, or just missing each other in general, they could still get a gift. Because of this, she was able to make over $1 million in 1942 alone. Unfortunately, she fell in hardship when she was diagnosed with cancer, and found herself fighting for her life. Despite that, she still kept to the grind, and remained the head of the company, as she introduced and worked on new dolls, including an adult-bodied fashion doll called Miss Nancy Ann. Despite the difficulties she faced, she was still keeping up with the market, and I think Miss Nancy Ann was a solid entry into the fashion doll market at the time. Unfortunately, she lost her battle with cancer in 1964, and the company has changed hands multiple times since then. Despite the difficulties she faced in her final years, she was still able to do what she loved, and even beat Mattel to market with an adult-bodied fashion doll. However, her movies are lost to time, and her work is disregarded or just unknown. And unfortunately, that's the case with all of these women. And these are only a few examples of the amazing talent there was in the toy industry at this time. These were savvy and dedicated businesswomen who overcame challenges, whether it was economical or personal, to gain success success. Madame Alexander saved her family's company during the war and went on to start her own company that was wildly successful and is still in business and is credited with making the first fashion doll. Jenny Graves was able to support herself and her family even after terrible personal loss, twice. And Nancy Ann Abbott was a single woman who took $100 during the Great Depression and turned it into $1 million company. These are women who came from pretty humble beginnings, who achieved great things all by following their dreams. They stepped up when they were needed and saw opportunity and took it, and they deserve to be recognized and remembered and not erased by a corporate narrative. And while I think that Ruth Handler and Mattel deserve a lot of credit, it's pretty ridiculous for them to get all of the credit. Barbie has more than earned her place as an icon. She's even won multiple fashion awards despite the fact that she's not even human, well deserved as they might be. She can stand on her own, and I don't have to fabricate this story about what the toy industry was like before her. There was a lot of underhandedness though when it came to Barbie's creation. For example, she was heavily inspired by a German doll called Bild Lilli. Some may even go as far as saying that they outright stole the doll, including the Bild company.
He and Ruth finally settled on a doll that hadn't really changed at all.
They copied her exactly like the German one.
Which I'll elaborate on, but first some backstory. In 1956, when adult-bodied fashion dolls were really gaining popularity, the Handlers took a family vacation to Switzerland. While there, their daughter Barbara Handler happened to notice a doll in the window, the Bild Lilli doll. Lilli was based off of a comic strip character from the Bild tabloid magazine. Barbara became enamored with the doll, so Ruth and Elliot Handler bought 3 of them and brought them back to America, where they more or less made their own version, all without the Bild company's knowledge. And putting the two side by side, you'll notice that they were very similar. They did make some adjustments, like the original Lilli dolls had molded on shoes, while Barbie didn't, but the overall design was more or less a copy. The American market was none the wiser, since Bild Lilli had never been translated into English, and the Bild company didn't find out about any of this until 1964. They tried to sue Mattel, however at that point Barbie made Mattel a huge company. A small toy company like Bild did not have the money or resources to actually take Mattel to court, so Mattel took them to the cleaners. They were forced to sell the rights to Lilli to Mattel. They had to sign contracts that were in English so they couldn't actually read them, and Bild never recovered from this. Mattel buried Lilli, and now whenever she does come up, all that's left of her is a very unfavorable narrative, basically accusing the comic of being rated R, as it depicted the daily life of Lilli as she worked as an escort.
Who also happened to be a call girl from a racy comic strip designed to inject a little pep into the step of post-war German men.
Well, it was based on a cartoon character who did nothing but have sex with men for money.
None of that is actually true. First of all, the character was not a call girl. She was an office worker who had her own income and could support herself. And I'm pretty sure if men did offer her money to sleep with them, she'd be very offended. It was a slice of life comic following Lilli's daily activities as she worked and dated. She was very outspoken and often would respond to people with witty comebacks. She had a lot of suitors, but she was very firm in her boundaries, and she expected to get married, so them writing her off as someone who has sex with men for money is completely inaccurate. She did have her faults. She was very materialistic, enjoying being showered with gifts and encouraging her suitors to buy stuff for her, and also kind of a slacker. There's one comic where she called in sick, but then she went to the beach, except her office manager was also at the beach. So that's awkward, but I guess everyone at this company doesn't take their job seriously. She may have been flawed, but she was endearing. The modern idea of her is also that the character was very difficult to find, both when it comes to the doll and the comic, and you could only get them at places like bars or cigar shops, because it was considered too scandalous for polite society. But she was actually heavily marketed, becoming somewhat of a mascot for Bild, and even a cultural icon at the time. You could find cutouts of her on newspaper stands, and she had a live-action movie adaptation in 1958. Barbie's only now getting a live-action movie despite existing for like 60 years, while Lilli got a live-action movie only a few years after she debuted in the comics. The comic was a huge success, so they decided to capitalize on it by creating merchandise, including a 3D doll of the main character, the very doll that was eventually discovered by the Handlers. And despite what Mattel wants you to believe, she actually was popular with children, which isn't that surprising given how big she actually was in Germany. By the time the Handlers found her, she already had over 100 outfits that you could buy for her, and her own play sets and dream houses. She was also featured at the 1956 1996 Nuremberg Toy Fair, where they showed her different fashions and she was featured alongside toys like toy trains and soldiers. But when Mattel got their hands on her, Lilli went from being a cultural icon in her home country to basically being erased, or being openly trashed. Ironically, oftentimes when people call her a floozy and so on and so forth, as an example, they use this comic where she's being harassed. Basically, she's in the changing room, and the caption says, "I can trust you not to peek, right?" But in reality, he's taking pictures. And yet they're blaming Lilli for this. That comes off as victim blaming to me. I don't know, the whole thing really sucks. Rolf Hauser, the original creator of the Bild Lilli doll, went on to say, "If I had never made Lilli, there would never have been a Barbie doll, and I would still be the head of one of Germany's top toy companies. Instead, everything my father suffered so much to build up is gone, and I am nothing." I feel like it could have been possible for Barbie and Lilli to exist in the same world if Mattel had actually been inspired by it instead of just copying it and not been so cutthroat. Although the least they could do is not spread this rumor about her being a call girl.
We could turn this slutty plastic object into something that would model adult behavior for middle-class girls in America.
They already destroyed her original company. Do they really have to drag her name through the mud? Honestly, I don't really think that Lilli deserves to be left as a dirty little secret. Plus, Barbie at this point has found her own identity. She's pretty much moved away from Lilli anyway. I'd say just let them be. So that's my insight into the history of the American fashion doll industry. There's a lot I didn't cover, but this video already took months of research, and a lot of this information was from before the internet, so I had to go through a lot of archives. Literally, I found Nancy Ann Abbott's obituary from 1964 in the New York Times. So thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot. What do you guys think of all of this? Were you aware of any of these figures? Which story surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, The Rabbit Mancer, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Garcia XV Legend, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Soundboy00, Owen Wildish, Player Zero, Kitsune Fiora, Lucas Geist, Dana Dine Executive, Jay Draws, Ninja Rex, Blue Spirit, Bandito Bane, Lil, Meowsers, and Sky. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. And that part's free. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. It's linked in the description. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.